In this video, I'll discuss the life cycles of EJB session beans. By now, you should be familiar with the idea that life cycles are an important part of the Java EE specifications. Almost every technology in the specifications has a life cycle, and you shouldn't really feel confident that you've understood a technology until you've had a chance to study the life cycle. Now, you may be able to guess the life cycle of an EJB singleton bean. Remember that the application server will only create one instance of a singleton bean. Can you think of any other technology in the Java EE specifications that only has one instance created? Servlets. Servlets are created only once. The singleton session bean lifecycle looks just like the servlet lifecycle, except instead of init and destroy, EJBs use a post-construct annotation and a pre-destroy annotation. Just like with servlets, your EJB may be instantiated early during startup. This means that you shouldn't use a constructor. Any initialization needs to be done when the post-construct method is called. Similarly, you don't use Java's finalize method. Instead, write any shutdown code in a pre-destroy method where you can be more sure that it will be run and that where you'll have access to other services of the application server. A stateless session bean works just like a singleton session bean. It has exactly the same life cycle. The only difference is that the application server will probably create more than one instance. It creates a pool of stateless session beans to manage incoming requests, but all of those session beans in the pool follow the same life cycle. Here's an example of using those lifecycle annotations in your own code. You can use any method name for your initialization and destruction code. Just add the post-construct or pre-destroy annotation, and the application server will ensure that they're called at the correct time in the application lifecycle. Now, stateful session beans are a bit more complicated. A special feature of stateful session beans is that if the application server starts running out of memory, or if it needs to migrate a running bean to another server, it can save those session beans to the hard disk. When the stateful session bean is needed again, the application server can reload it and bring it back into memory. So you might like to pause this video now and then see if you can guess the life cycle of a stateful session bean. Well, here's what it looks like. This looks just like the stateless and singleton life cycle, but it has an extra box and a few extra lines. That extra box refers to the situation where the application server has decided to save memory by storing the session bean to the disk. Before saving the bean, it calls the pre-passivate method. The bean is then said to be in a passive or passivated state. When the client code needs to use the bean again, the application server will recreate an instance of the bean and then call a post-activate method for the bean to do any reinitialization. Finally, there's an extra arrow from initialized to finalized. If you annotate a method on your stateful bean with the remove annotation, then right after you call that method, the application server will remove the bean. So the remove annotation is the way you can write your own custom close or finalize method that also tells the server that the use of the stateful bean is finished, it's ready to be discarded. You should write a remote method on any stateful bean, because if you don't, the bean will linger around for a long time. The application server will eventually discard a bean that hasn't been used for a long time, but that bean will be taking up memory and resources until the timeout occurs. So here's an example of code that uses those annotations. That's it. Like all the other life cycles, it isn't complicated, but it is important to know.